Last week was a phenomenal week for progressives because we had a number of victories across the country. So now, several progressive Democrats will face off against a Republican in November, and that includes individuals like John Fetterman, like Kara Eastman. So they're winning these primaries against establishment Democrats, and now what are some Democrats doing? Well, they're saying, good job, progressives, now you're going to lose to a Republican because you're just too liberal to beat a right-winger. But in an interview with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, Bernie Sanders explained why that's not actually true. In fact, the opposite is true.
So let me ask you to respond to the concern now that you've heard from National Democrats. And I know technically your organization didn't back Ms. Eastman in Nebraska, but many other progressives did. And they're not writing the race off, but they are now backing off on their hopes of it. They think, oh, she's not electable enough. What do you say to National Democrats who say, you know what, be careful of this, of nominating folks that are too progressive?
I think that they are wrong, and I think they are misreading where the American people are at. You know, Chuck, many of the issues that I campaigned on 2 years ago, issues like Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, taking on the pharmaceutical industry, making public colleges and universities tuition-free, legalizing marijuana. A few years ago, those were seen as radical, fringy ideas. Well, you know what? In every instance, those ideas are now supported by the American people, by a majority of the American people, overwhelming percentage of Democrats. So I think what candidates all over the country are now beginning to understand is that it is more important to reach out to the people in your community, working people, the middle class, lower income people, then rather than just worry about what wealthy campaign contributors want you to say. So I think candidates who run on a progressive agenda, which demands that we take on the billionaire class, that we end the movement to an oligarchy in this country, that we fight for the rights of working people, I think that's not only good public policy, I think that's good politics, and I think many of those candidates will win, because you're going to see voter turnout go up and a level of excitement that conservative Democrats don't raise.
Do you buy the idea that there is such thing as electability, that should be part of a primary argument?
Well, sure, we all want to win. The question is, what constitutes electability? 4 years ago, as you will recall, Republicans won a landslide victory all across this country. And the reason was, primarily, that we had the lowest voter turnout since World War II. Some 37% of the American people voted. Because establishment Democrats don't generate excitement. And I think when you have progressive candidates, and we have seen this now for the last year and a half, since Trump has been elected, we have seen progressive candidates seeing voter turnout go up because the people in their communities know that it's time to stand up and fight. That's what they want to see. So the goal of the Democrats, it seems to me, in 2018, has got to be significantly raising voter turnout, and you do that by talking about the issues that working families care about.
So essentially what Bernie Sanders is arguing here is that Democrats have to be able to win over their own base. We constantly see them putting this emphasis on the need to win over moderates. But as they try to move towards the center and the right, they are abandoning their liberal voting base. They're moving too far to the right, and they are making themselves unappealing to normal Americans who support left-leaning policies, like Medicare for all, like raising the minimum wage and attaching that to inflation, like legalizing recreational marijuana. I mean, you can't just continue to chase moderates and expect your own base to still remain loyal to you. So what Bernie Sanders is saying here is that with these progressives facing off against Republicans, well, this is actually good because they are going to galvanize the Democratic Party's voting base and get them to come out and vote. I mean, you can't win over moderates if you can't even win over your own base. So to get to Bernie Sanders' specific quote, he says, "It is more important to reach out to people in your community, working people, the middle class, lower income people, rather than just worry about what wealthy campaign contributors want you to say." Now, he states that this is important because it facilitates an increase in voter turnout and a level of excitement that you don't see with conservative Democrats. Yeah, that's absolutely true. There were a number of Jill Stein voters, I think actually a pretty large percentage, I don't know it off the top of my head, that claim they would have just stayed home had Jill Stein not been an option, meaning Hillary Clinton was not a sufficiently liberal person that liberals like myself and Jill Stein voters didn't want to come out and support her. But if you have someone who actually is really distinguishing themselves as a true progressive, if they're saying, I'm not like the Republican, I'm not just marginally better than the Republican, well, of course that's exciting because people are hurting currently. People can barely put food on their table. And this incrementalist approach that Democrats just refuse to move away from, it's not helping them win elections. And again, I shouldn't be having to talk about why running to the middle or the right is a failed strategy, because we saw how this played out over the last 10 years. They lost more than 1,000 seats in state legislatures. So how can you still continue to defend this approach? I mean, they still do defend this approach. If you run a progressive, you have a better chance of winning. Will you win every single race? No. But will you increase the odds that you will win against the Republican? Yes, absolutely. I think that's just common sense, because if you put up a liberal candidate, liberal voters will be more inclined to vote for that individual. And Bernie states here, Republicans won big in 2014 because we had the lowest voter turnout since World War II, saying it was because, quote, establishment Democrats don't generate excitement. Now let's go back to 2014 for a moment. We had individuals like Allison Lundergan Grimes running against Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. She wouldn't even admit that she voted for Barack Obama. That's how centrist she was. Now let me remind you, Barack Obama is obviously a centrist himself. So if you're so right-wing that you won't even admit that you voted for the party's last nominee, who's a centrist Democrat, actually a conservative Democrat in many instances, why would you think you even have a chance? And of course, guess what happened? Mitch McConnell crushed her. But when you look to states like Oregon, Jeff Merkley was running against a Koch-backed Republican named Monica Webby. What did he do? Did he run to the center and try to win over Republican voters who were more inclined to support Webby? No, he ran as a progressive. He teamed up with Elizabeth Warren, and they did fundraisers together, progressive small dollar fundraisers. So you have to understand that if you keep doing the same failed strategy over and over and over again, it's not going to work. Sure, you may have some victories here and there, but this will not be a long-term strategy. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at centrist Democrats, I mean, for example, 33 House Democrats aligned with Republicans to deregulate Wall Street. And this includes someone from Oregon, Kurt Schrader, someone who should be a progressive, who's from a dark blue state, voted to deregulate Wall Street. Well, guess what happens? If you see how these moderate Democrats conduct themselves in Congress, well, the voter thinks, why would I come out and support that? Voting is a chore. You have to register. You have to be there by a certain day, by a certain time. It's a chore. It's a hassle. So why would anyone want to bear the costs of voting if they don't believe they're getting a good payoff from voting? So this is something that Democrats have got to get through their heads if they want to defeat Republicans, because certainly as a progressive, I want Democrats to defeat Republicans. They may not be a great party, but they're obviously objectively better than Republicans, and I'd rather try to get Democrats to get on board with progressive policies than fight against, what Republicans are doing to basically ruin the country. So they've got to understand that what they've been doing, their strategy has just been a failure, and they have to listen to Bernie Sanders and stop being afraid to be bold, because that's what this is. They don't want to be bold. They don't want to embrace progressivism and populism, but if they did, they would be unstoppable.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.